Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a topic that's top of mind for many organizations these days, migrating a customer data platform from a legacy on-premises setup to the cloud.
Definitely a hot topic right now. And for good reason.
We're looking at a specific case today, moving away from Informatica MDM, running on Oracle Exadata, and making the leap to, you guessed it, AWS.
A classic move. We see this a lot.
The challenge, of course, is how to modernize this platform without losing any of the core functionality. It's a balancing act.
It is, and there are a lot of moving parts to consider. We're going to untangle those technical details, but also talk about the bigger picture, why AWS makes sense for this kind of migration.
I'm already curious about those why questions, but first let's set the stage. Can you give us a glimpse into this legacy setup? What are we dealing with here?
Imagine a classic three-tier architecture.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
At the bottom, you've got the Oracle Exadata database appliance. It's powerful, it's all-in-one, it does it all, storing customer data, running the Informatica MDM application, the whole shebang.
So it's like a one-stop shop for your data.
Yeah, exactly. On top of that, you have the Informatica MDM hub and all its related services managing the data integration logic, security, and the MDM processing itself.
Okay, so we have the database and the MDM engine. What's the third tier?
The user interface layer, where people can configure those MDM rules, manage the data, interact with the system.
So it's like having one gigantic tool that does everything. I can see how that might seem appealing at the first glance, but I bet it comes with its own set of challenges, right?
You hit the nail on the head. It's the classic jack of all trades, master of none situation.
I've been there.
While a monolithic system like this can seem convenient initially, it quickly becomes a bottleneck.
A bottleneck, how so?
Scaling up becomes a huge hurdle because you're essentially stuck scaling that entire Exadata beast, an expensive proposition.
Ouch, that doesn't sound fun.
And then you run into the dreaded vendor lock-in, especially with all that custom code and Informatica-specific logic woven into the system.
Vendor lock-in, a phrase that makes every IT manager shudder.
It's a real concern, for sure.
And I bet the licensing and infrastructure costs aren't exactly helping the situation.
You know it. Maintaining both Informatica MDM and Exadata can put a huge strain on your budget. Plus, imagine trying to add new data sources or tweak the logic of your data transformations.
Oh, I can only imagine. It doesn't sound very agile.
It's not a quick fix, that's for sure. You need specialists, people with deep Informatica expertise, and those folks are hard to find and even harder to keep.
Okay, so the limitations are becoming clear, but before we jump into solutions, let's follow the data for a bit. How does it actually flow through this legacy system? Walk me through it.
Picture it as a journey, a multi-stop journey. It all starts with data ingestion.
Okay, the data's starting its trip.
We're talking 40 or more different ETL that's extract, transform, load workflows, mainly using Informatica Power Center and MDM batch jobs.
40? That's a lot of workflows to keep track of.
It's a lot. They're pulling data from all sorts of sources, CRM, ERP, event registration systems, you name it.
Wow, it's like a data highway with all those different lanes merging.
A very busy highway. And each workflow can be pretty complex. They extract the data, load it into staging tables on the Oracle database, and then things get interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
The data goes through a whole validation and normalization process using Informatica's data quality rules. This ensures consistency and accuracy. We got to make sure the data is clean before we move on.
Data quality, the foundation of any good data platform. What kind of cleaning and scrubbing are we talking about here?
We're talking address standardization, making sure names are cleaned up, mapping codes to consistent values, basically anything you can think of to get that incoming data into tip-top shape before we even get to the MDM part.
So you're really whipping the data into shape.
Absolutely. We want a uniform, high-quality data set. It's essential for what comes next.
Makes sense. So once the data is sparkling clean, what happens next? Time for the MDM magic, right?
Exactly. This is where Informatica MDM takes center stage.
Showtime.
It uses configurable matching rules to pinpoint and merge those pesky duplicate customer records. It's like a detective, piecing together clues to find the duplicates. Names, emails, IDs, all those data points.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when the system finds a duplicate? Are both records kept?
That's where the concept of survivorship rules comes in.
Survivorship rules? That sounds intriguing.
Let's say you have customer data from both your website and your physical store. A survivorship rule might say, okay, we prioritize the online address because it's more recent, so we use that for marketing.
That's smart. So we're not just randomly merging data, we're applying logic to choose the best version of the truth.
Exactly. It's all about creating a single, trusted, golden record for each customer.
A golden record, the holy grail of customer data.
Exactly. And it's what makes MDM so powerful for things like marketing, personalization, customer service, you name it.
So we've got this system that pulls data from all over, cleans it up, merges duplicates, and creates those golden records. That's a lot of heavy lifting.
It is. But we talked about some pain points earlier. Where do things start to fall apart with this legacy setup?
Yeah, let's get back to those challenges. What are the major drawbacks?
Well, as we mentioned before, scaling that Exadata platform can be a real headache. It's powerful, sure, but it's also a bit like a dinosaur big, not very agile.
So like if your data needs suddenly grow.
You're in trouble. If you need to handle a surge in data or you need more processing power, you're basically stuck upgrading that entire Exadata box. More cost, more time, neither of which are ideal in today's world.
Right. Businesses need to move quickly.
Exactly. And then there's those hefty licensing costs, both for Informatica and Oracle. It's a significant chunk of change, especially when cloud solutions are so cost-effective these days.
Yeah, cost is always a major consideration. Are there any other drawbacks we should be aware of with this legacy setup?
One more that's particularly relevant to migrating to AWS is that everything's tightly coupled with Informatica tools.
Uh-oh, I see where this is going.
Every time you need to integrate a new data source or tweak the logic, you need someone with specific Informatica skills. And as we said before, those folks are hard to come by. It can really slow down development and limit your agility, especially compared to what you can do with AWS services.
Yeah, AWS offers so much flexibility with their services and their support for open source tools.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the appeal, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've laid out the landscape, we've seen how data flows through this system, and we've highlighted some key challenges. So let's talk about the big move, migrating this entire operation to AWS. What are the main approaches you've considered?
There are two main paths we usually explore: lift and shift and re-architect.
Okay, so lift and shift sounds pretty straightforward. Is that just picking up the whole system and plopping it down in the cloud as is? And re-architects implies a more, shall we say, surgical approach.
You got it. Lift and shift is all about replicating your existing setup in the cloud. You swap out Exadata for an Amazon RDS for Oracle instance. You deploy your Informatica application server on EC2 instances, maybe in containers. It can get you into the cloud quickly. But
There's a but coming, isn't there? It sounds almost too good to be true.
the trade-off is you're bringing all that baggage with you. The high licensing costs, the vendor lock-in, the complexity. You get the benefits of AWS infrastructure, sure, but you're not really modernizing your software or taking advantage of all the cloud-native services that can make life so much easier and potentially save you a ton of money.
This is like moving into a fancy new house, but keeping all your old, clunky furniture. You might have a change of scenery, but it's not a fresh start. What about the re-architect approach?
Now we're talking. Re-architecting means we roll up our sleeves, we redesign the data platform from the ground up, we leverage AWS native services, and potentially some open source tools as well. It's a chance to build something truly modern, optimized for the cloud.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Fresh start, new furniture, the whole shebang. Tell me the details. What would this re-architected system actually look like?
This is where things get really exciting. Instead of that big monolithic Exadata, we break things down into separate layers, each one optimized for a specific task.
Okay, I'm hooked. Walk me through those layers.
So first, picture your data lake. This is essentially a huge scalable storage area for all your raw and processed data. Amazon S3 is perfect for this. It's durable, scalable, and cost-effective. Then you have your ELT processing layer where all the data transformation magic happens. Would probably use AWS Glue here, a serverless Spark service that can handle those complex transformations.
So we've got the data lake and the transformation engine. What about the MDM piece? Where do those golden records get created in this brave new AWS world?
This is where things get really interesting. AWS doesn't have a single off-the-shelf MDM solution like Informatica, but it offers a powerful combo of services that we can use to build a custom cloud-native solution tailored to your needs.
Custom solutions. That sounds a bit daunting. Are we talking about writing tons of code?
Not necessarily. While there will be some custom development, AWS offers a ton of tools and frameworks to streamline the process. Plus, by using microservices, you can be really agile, iterating and adapting as your needs change.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about this custom MDM solution.
Think of it as a team effort. For identifying duplicates, technically called entity resolution, we have Amazon Entity Resolution. It's a fully managed service specifically built for matching and linking records.
So that takes care of finding the duplicates. What about merging them and applying those survivorship rules?
To do that, we'd probably build a custom merge service. This could be a microservice running on AWS Fargate or Lambda, which gives you tons of flexibility to implement your specific business logic.
So we have a data lake for storage, an ELT layer for transformations, and a custom MDM solution. Anything else?
Of course, we need a place to store those golden records, right? Amazon Aurora, highly scalable and performant relational database would be a great fit. And then we need to think about how people will access and manage all this data.
Yeah, we can't forget about the humans in the loop.
Exactly. We could create a custom web UI using Angular or React, maybe, and deploy it through AWS Amplify hosting.
A custom UI sounds fancy.
It would give your data stewards a seamless, modern user experience, all within the AWS ecosystem.
This all sounds incredibly powerful and, honestly, a bit overwhelming.
It is a lot to take in, for sure.
Is there a middle ground? Is there a way to get the benefits of re-architecting without having to reinvent the wheel completely?
You're thinking strategically, and that's exactly why we recommend a phased approach to re-architecting.
Okay, tell me more.
We wouldn't rip and replace everything all at once. Instead, we'd start by migrating the most critical components and gradually move towards a fully cloud-native solution over time.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like remodeling your kitchen. You wouldn't tear down all the cabinets and appliances at once, right? You tackle it in stages.
A great analogy. It's all about minimizing disruption, managing risk, and making sure the transition is as smooth as possible.
So a phased approach helps reduce the risk. But what about those 40-plus ETL workflows from the legacy system? What happens to them in this AWS world?
Great question. Remember AWS Glue?
Of course. The data transformation engine.
Exactly. That's where those workflows will find a new home.
So basically rebuilding them in AWS Glue.
We'd carefully translate each workflow into a Glue script, keeping the core logic but making it cloud optimized.
Translate. So we're not just copy and pasting the old Informatica code into AWS.
Definitely not. It's about understanding that underlying logic and re-implementing it using AWS tools and services.
It's like translating a book from one language to another. You don't just swap out words. You capture the essence and retell the story in a new language.
A perfect way to put it.
Speaking of languages, you mentioned open source tools earlier. How do they fit into this migration puzzle?
That's a great point. When building this new data platform, you have a choice. Stick with AWS native services or sprinkle in some open source tools.
Decisions.
Both have their advantages and trade-offs.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the pros and cons.
AWS native services like Glue, Redshift, S3, they offer incredible convenience and reliability. They're tightly integrated, managed by AWS, often come with great security features built in.
Sounds pretty good. What's the catch?
They might not always offer that fine-grained level of customization you might need for very specific use cases.
And I'm guessing that's where open source comes in.
Exactly. Open source gives you the freedom to tinker, to customize, to really build solutions that perfectly fit your unique needs. Plus, it can potentially be more cost-effective, especially if you're comfortable managing things yourself.
I can see the appeal. But there's always a trade-off, right?
Yeah. Right. With open source, you take on more responsibility for maintenance, security, and making sure everything plays nicely with your other systems.
That's a classic trade-off.
Yeah.
Convenience and reliability versus customization and control.
You got it. And the best approach might be a hybrid one, leveraging the strengths of both AWS native and open source tools.
The best of both worlds. But how do you decide which tools to use for which tasks?
That's where a deep understanding of your specific requirements and your team's capabilities comes into play. It's all about choosing the right tool for the right job.
Give me an example of how this hybrid approach might play out in a real-world scenario.
Let's say you need to pull data from a very specific source, and there's no pre-built connector in AWS Glue. You might turn to an open source tool like Apache NiFi or Airbyte, which have tons of connectors just for that one specific ingestion task. Then you could feed that data right into your AWS Glue pipeline seamlessly.
So you're basically mixing and matching tools to get the job done. Like having both power drills and screwdrivers in your toolbox, you use the right tool for the task at hand.
Exactly. And this hybrid approach extends to other areas as well. For orchestration, you might choose AWS step functions for its ease of use, but you could also opt for Apache Airflow, which can run on AWS. It all depends on your needs.
What about data quality in MDM? Any open source options worth considering there?
There are some. OpenDQ is one that's emerging as a potential supplement to your AWS setup. It offers address standardization, matching, governance dashboards, all sorts of useful stuff.
Wow, we have a lot of options to consider. It's exciting, but also a bit overwhelming. But before we get carried away with all these tools and services, let's talk about the elephant in the room: cost.
The big C word.
Yeah.
It's a critical consideration, no doubt.
How do we even begin to estimate the financial impact of a migration like this? Especially when we're comparing a legacy system with those fixed costs to a cloud environment where costs can be more variable, right?
You're raising a crucial point. When we
Yeah.
talk about AWS and cost, it's important to understand that you're paying for what you use.
Okay, I'm listening.
With services like Glue, you're charged based on the processing power and how long your jobs run. It's different than those fixed licensing costs.
So it's like paying for your electricity. You only get billed for the energy you consume.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But with open source tools, don't you also have to factor in the cost of running those on AWS infrastructure?
You do, but there are tons of ways to optimize costs on AWS. We can get into those in more detail if you'd like.
Okay, hold on. We've covered a ton of ground already. I need a minute to process all this before we move on. Okay, I'm ready to jump back in.
Yeah.
We were starting to get into the cost considerations, and I'm curious about those optimization strategies you mentioned.
Right. So beyond just the raw cost of those AWS services, we have to think about the hidden costs of your legacy system, too.
The hidden costs, what do you mean?
Those licensing fees for Informatica and Oracle, they're only part of the story, right? You also have the ongoing cost of maintaining that aging hardware, the potential downtime if things crash.
Right, those unexpected costs.
And let's not forget the difficulty of finding skilled people to manage it all. Those hidden costs add up.
It's like that old car that keeps needing expensive repairs. Eventually, it just makes sense to get a new one.
Exactly. And with AWS, you also get their massive infrastructure, their security expertise, their constant innovation. They're always releasing new stuff, so you know your data platform is going to stay modern and efficient.
Okay, I'm sold on exploring the cost-benefit analysis in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
But assuming we do decide to move forward, how do we actually make this migration happen? It's a huge undertaking.
It's not a simple flip of a switch, that's for sure. That's why we break down the migration process into phases.
Okay, so tell me about these phases. What's the first step?
It all starts with assessment and planning. We call it phase 0. We call it phase 0. We dig deep into your current setup. We document everything: data sources, workflows, every little quirk of your Informatica MDM system.
So it's like taking inventory before a big move, making sure you know exactly what you're taking with you.
Precisely. We use this information to create a detailed migration plan, a blueprint for your future AWS architecture.
That makes sense. A solid foundation is crucial for a project of this scale. What comes after we've mapped out the terrain, so to speak?
Next is phase 1, where we put our plans to the test with a proof of concept, a POC.
Ah, the POC. Everyone loves a good POC.
It's essential. We build a mini version of the system using the AWS services and open source tools we've chosen. This lets us catch any potential issues early on and make sure the design is solid before we go full steam ahead.
So it's like a test drive for our new AWS data platform, making sure it handles the road conditions before we embark on the full journey.
A great way to put it. It's all about minimizing surprises and validating our assumptions. If the POC goes well and we get the green light, we move on to phase 2, foundation setup.
Okay, so we're starting to build the actual system now.
This is where we build the core infrastructure in AWS.
Huh.
The S3 buckets for our data lake, the Amazon Redshift cluster if you need it, the Amazon Aurora database. We lay the groundwork.
So it's construction time. We're laying the foundation for our new data platform.
And we'll do all of this using infrastructure as code, or IEC. We define all of our AWS infrastructure in code, which lets us automate the setup.
Automation, one of the best things about the cloud.
Exactly. IEC makes everyone's lives easier. It ensures consistency and helps enforce security best practices right from the get-go.
And then we handle things like networking, security groups, connections back to your on-premises systems.
It's a busy phase, for sure. But once the foundation is set, then we can start focusing on the really exciting parts, the MDM and those 40-plus workflows.
I was wondering when we get back to those. So phase 3 is all about migrating the MDM piece.
Precisely. We call it MDM core development. This is where we translate those Informatica MDM rules into the AWS world.
So maybe setting up Amazon Entity Resolution, building out that custom merge service we talked about earlier.
Exactly. We'll also design and build that data stewardship UI if you decide to go custom.
So it's like translating the brains of the operation.
Yeah.
Making sure all that MDM logic makes the move to AWS.
A great analogy.
What about those 40 workflows? Are they just patiently waiting on the sidelines during this phase?
Not at all. Phase 4 is all about them ELT pipeline development. We take each of those Informatica workflows and migrate them to the AWS world. This might mean writing glue scripts, configuring NiFi flows, or a combo of both.
This sounds like a very detailed process. How do you make sure nothing gets lost in translation, so to speak?
We'll rely heavily on the documentation from Phase 0. Your MDM expert and your data engineers will work closely to understand each workflow, make sure the business logic is accurately implemented in AWS.
So it's all about meticulous planning, close collaboration, a deep understanding of both the old and new systems. Okay, so we've got the MDM migrated, the workflows rebuilt. Are we ready to go live?
Not quite yet. We need to make sure all the pieces work together, right? And that the output of our new AWS system matches what we were getting from the legacy system. That's Phase 5, integration testing and data reconciliation.
The ultimate test. Can AWS really deliver the same results as Informatica?
It absolutely can. We run parallel tests, feed the same data into both systems, compare the results. We'll also do performance testing, make sure the AWS solution can handle your volume and processing needs.
No room for error here. We need to be confident before we make the switch.
Absolutely. We want to catch any inconsistencies or performance issues early on. And speaking of which, once we've thoroughly tested everything and we're happy with the results, it's time for Phase 6, migration cutover.
The moment of truth. This is where things get real.
Exactly. We carefully orchestrate the switch from the legacy system to AWS, usually during a low usage period like a weekend, to minimize disruption.
Okay, so we move the data, flip the switch, and everything's running in AWS, project complete.
Well, the migration itself is done, but it doesn't end there.
Yeah.
We'll continue to work with you to optimize the system, monitor its performance, and make sure it meets your needs as they evolve.
It's an ongoing partnership.
Exactly.
So it's like moving into that new house that once you've unpacked the boxes, you still have to decorate, arrange the furniture, make it feel like home.
A great way to put it. And with AWS, you have a platform that can grow and adapt with you.
You can explore new services, experiment with new tools. It really does open up a whole new world of possibilities.
It does.
Okay, so we've outlined the phases, but this kind of project needs more than just a plan, right? What about the people, the expertise? We need a dream team to pull this off.
You're absolutely right. A successful migration depends on having the right people with the right skills. And it's not just technical expertise. We need strong project management, communication, collaboration. It's a team effort.
Okay, give me a rundown of this dream team. Who are the key players here?
At the top, you need a skilled project manager to keep everyone on track, manage risks, ensure clear communication, someone to make sure things run smoothly.
Someone to keep the trains running on time, so to speak.
Exactly. And then you need a cloud architect, someone to design the AWS environment, ensure we're following best practices.
So the cloud architect is like the architect of our new data home, drawing up the blueprints and making sure everything is structurally sound.
A perfect analogy. And then, of course, we have the data engineers, the builders who will be doing the heavy lifting, writing the code, configuring AWS services.
They're the ones in the trenches, making sure all the data pipes are connected and the data is flowing smoothly. What about MDM expertise? We can't forget about that.
Definitely not. You need an MDM expert who understands your current system, someone who can help us validate that matching and merging logic as we move to AWS.
They're the keepers of the MDM wisdom, making sure we don't lose any of that critical business knowledge during the migration. Anyone else essential for this team?
You'll also need a DevOps engineer to automate things, implement CI/CD pipelines, and ensure you have robust monitoring and logging. And QA engineers, of course, to test everything thoroughly. We can't forget about testing.
Testing. You can never have too much testing, especially with sensitive data.
Exactly. And depending on your needs, we might also involve security and network engineers to handle things like VPN connections, security reviews, make sure the AWS environment meets all your compliance requirements.
Wow, we're assembling a team of specialists here, each with their own superpower.
It's like the Avengers of data migration, but In all seriousness, it really is a team effort. And it's not just about the technical skills. It's about communication, collaboration, a shared commitment to making this a success.
So we have our dream team, we have our plan. What about the timeline? How long does a migration like this actually take?
It depends on the scope, how much data, how complex those workflows are. For a system like yours, we're probably looking at 6 to 8 months.
Wow, that's a significant chunk of time. It's not something to be taken lightly.
It's a big project, but remember, we're not just moving data, we're modernizing your entire platform. And this investment will pay off in the long run.
It's about setting your organization up for success in the future.
Exactly. Increased agility, scalability, cost effectiveness. It can be a real game changer.
Okay, so we've talked about the phases, the team, the timeline. Now let's talk about the budget. How do you even begin to estimate the financial impact of all this? I know we talked about AWS costs being variable, but there's so many other factors to consider.
You're right. Budgeting for a cloud migration is different than a traditional on-premises setup. You have to think about upfront costs and ongoing operational expenses.
Okay, break that down for me. What kind of upfront costs are we talking about?
Think AWS service fees, labor costs for the team, maybe costs for third-party tools. Basically, the cost of building our new data house, as we've been calling it.
Right, the initial investment. And what about ongoing expenses? Those are the tricky ones, right?
That's where that pay-as-you-go cloud model comes in. With services like Glue and Redshift, you're charged based on how much you actually use. The more you process, the more it costs.
It's like your utility bill. You pay for what you consume. But how do we make sure those costs don't get out of control?
That's where optimization comes in. We work with you to make sure your AWS resources are the right size, you're using cost-effective storage, you're following best practices. It's all about using the cloud intelligently.
So we're not just moving to the cloud. We're learning how to be smart about using it.
Exactly. And don't forget those cost savings from retiring your legacy system, those licensing fees for Informatica and Oracle, the hardware maintenance costs, all of that goes away.
Okay, so we factor in both the new AWS costs and the savings from getting rid of the old system. It's more complex than just looking at an AWS price list.
Exactly. And you get all those added benefits of AWS, the global infrastructure, the security, the constant innovation. It's a big win.
I'm starting to see the big picture here. Okay, so we've talked about costs, we've assembled our dream team, we have a plan in place. But even with the best planning, there are always risks with a project this big. What are some of the potential challenges we might face during the migration? And how do we avoid those pitfalls?
You're right. No project is without risk. And when we're talking about something as important as your customer data, we need to be extra careful.
Okay, so what are the biggest risks? What should we be prepared for?
One of the biggest is data loss. We can't afford to lose or corrupt any of that precious data during the move.
Data loss. That's the ultimate nightmare scenario. How do you prevent that from happening?
We have a multi-layered approach. We enable versioning on your S3 bucket so you have a history of your data and can roll back if needed. We also do regular backups of your Aurora database, and we use tools like AWS Database Migration Service, or DMS, to carefully move that data from Oracle Exadata to AWS.
So it's all about redundancy and backups, making sure you have multiple copies of the data just in case. What else? What other risks are out there?
Timeline slippage is another big one.
Yes, delays. Every project manager's least favorite word.
Migrations are complex, right? Unexpected issues pop up and can delay things. So we build in buffer time. We break the project down into smaller tasks to help us stay on track.
So you anticipate the unexpected and have a plan B, and maybe even a plan C, ready to go. What else could throw us off course?
Technical challenges are bound to happen. Compatibility issues between your old systems and AWS services. Or maybe we discover that a specific tool isn't the best fit for a particular job.
It's that square peg, round hole problem again. Sometimes things just don't fit together the way we expect.
You got it. That's where having a team with deep AWS experience is so valuable. They can anticipate these issues, troubleshoot problems, come up with solutions.
So having the right people is critical. What other risks should we be aware of?
Another one we see a lot is a skills gap within the existing team.
A skills gap, what do you mean?
Moving to AWS requires a new set of skills, right? It's different than managing an on-premises system. So we provide training on AWS services and best practices throughout the project. We also offer mentoring and knowledge transfer opportunities.
So you're not just moving the data, you're also upskilling the team.
Exactly. We want your team to be confident managing this new AWS environment.
Okay, so we've talked about the risks, and it sounds like you have strategies to address those.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we need to think about before we launch into this migration?
One final crucial thing to remember is communication and collaboration. A migration of this scale involves a lot of people.
Right. Different teams, internal folks, maybe even external partners.
Exactly. And everyone needs to be on the same page. So we establish clear communication channels, regular meetings, detailed documentation. Everyone's in sync.
It's like an orchestra. All the different instruments need to be playing in harmony to create beautiful music.
That's a great analogy. That shared understanding, that's what makes a project like this successful.
Okay, so it sounds like we've covered all the bases. We have a plan, we have a team, we're aware of the risks. Are we ready to take the plunge?
Almost. There's one last piece of the puzzle.
One last piece. Okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
It's about what happens after the migration. A lot of companies treat moving to the cloud as this one-time project.
I see, so check the box and we're done.
Yeah, but the real magic happens when you see the cloud as a journey, an ongoing journey.
A journey, okay.
It's not just about moving, it's about
Transforming, all right. You've definitely piqued my curiosity.
Once you're on AWS, a whole world of possibilities opens up.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What does this transform in the cloud idea actually look like? Give me some examples.
So think about services like Amazon Personalize.
Personalize, what's that?
It lets you build those personalized recommendations into your applications. You might also like suggestions that everyone loves.
Ah, I see, like when you're shopping online.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference in terms of customer engagement and even revenue.
I can see that. So it's about taking that data and actually using it to improve the customer experience.
Exactly. Or consider Amazon Forecast, which uses machine learning to generate these really accurate predictions. You can use that for inventory optimization, planning marketing campaigns, all sorts of things.
So we're not just managing the data, we're actually extracting valuable insights from it.
Exactly. And think about integrating your customer data with other data sources like social media feeds or market trends. You can do all that with AWS.
Wow, the possibilities really are endless.
They are. It's all about seeing this migration as a starting point, a launch pad. It's not the end, it's just the beginning.
Well, I'm feeling inspired.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground today. It's amazing. From the inner workings of that legacy system to all this incredible potential of AWS. As we wrap things up, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember? What's the big message here?
It comes down to this. Moving your customer data platform to AWS is more than just a tech upgrade. It's a strategic decision that can really change how your business operates.
It's a transformation, not just a migration.
Exactly. You get that agility, scalability, and cost effectiveness.
Right.
And it's a chance to really change how you work with data. Smarter decisions, better results.
And don't forget that peace of mind. Your data is safe and sound on AWS, a world-class infrastructure.
For sure. But you need a solid plan, a phased approach, and the right tools for the job.
And the right team, too, right? The experts who can guide you through the process.
Absolutely. Having that team in place can make all the difference.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Don't just replicate what you're doing today. Reimagine your data platform. Explore new services, new approaches. Keep learning. The cloud is always changing, and the possibilities really are limitless.
Well said. It's been an incredible deep dive, and I think our listeners are walking away feeling pretty energized.
It's been a pleasure. Remember, embrace the cloud. It's a journey, not a destination.
I love that. And until next time, keep exploring.